The journey itself is the thing in an old camper van. As a destination gets closer and more milestones are passed than remain, there is sometimes a pang of melancholy. You realise that you will miss the road. You will especially miss those who travelled with you and those you met on the way. You remember again to appreciate and to enjoy the trip while it still lasts. I read somewhere that we all have a happiness set point, a level of happiness that we naturally gravitate towards. But this set point is not fixed, and we can learn to increase it through intentional effort and practice. I think that I increased my happiness set point almost accidentally by adopting a dog. I always wanted a dog, but circumstances never allowed it. Growing up, my parents worked as teachers, so there was nobody at home all day. I moved into my first flat in my teens, and for the next 30 years I lived in precarious rented accommodation. I liked my freedom and being able to travel. Then I got my first cheap camper van. I loved travelling around Ireland and the festival scene. I found my tribe. There was a vibrant punk rock scene in Dublin. There was a great sense of community in that world. I was getting older, so I decided to teach myself to make films. For my first film, I went to Ghana for the African Nations Championship. I made another film about a punk festival in Donegal where the beat played in the wilderness up a mountainside.
Love music, hate racism. Very important statement.
My third film was about my friend, the disability activist Dara Gallagher.
This t-shirt is saying basically you have to fight for your rights. So if the meek and peaceful and quiet people who don't do anything.
Dara was a tremendous character, and largely on account of this, the film had some success. Although sadly, Dara passed away in 2015. I then started work on my first documentary feature film. This was to be about Dr. Ahmed Osman, a Sudanese medical doctor who spoke up against the use of rape as a weapon of war in the refugee camps in Darfur. He was arrested and tortured, and when he was released he fled to Ireland and claimed asylum. Here he was put in the Direct Provision Centre for 9 years while his claim was processed. It was incredibly difficult for him and for his partner Tagwa. I filmed Ahmed for a year with a small committed crew, and from a filmmaking perspective things looked promising. And then everything fell apart for me. Firstly, it was because of something that was actually really good news. Ahmed finally got citizenship, which meant that he could leave Direct Provision. He and Tagwa, who was an engineer, got employment opportunities in Scotland, and they decided to move there. I was delighted for them, but this also meant that I could no longer film with them, and the feature documentary, into which we had invested our professional hopes and put so much work, remained unfinished. Things got worse. I had been living for 14 years in a large, cheap rented basement on the North Circular Road. Then the housing crisis bit. I suddenly had nowhere to live and nowhere to work from. And then things got far worse again. My father was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and he and my elderly mother suddenly needed support. For a while I lived in my camper van. I would drive them to appointments and I was on constant call. I generally parked on a campsite in Rush. The campsite overlooks the North Beach, and it has always been a place of refuge for me. I like it best when it is slightly out of season and there is enough of a chill to deter the sunbathers and day trippers. I grieved my father and to an extent my lost life and failed ambitions there. And in the circumstances, I was generally as happy in Rush as I could have been anywhere. There is something irresistibly satisfying about watching dogs on a beach. Their happiness is infectious. A girl called Sinead, who had a mobile home on the campsite, fostered dogs with Cara Rescue, and I was always slightly envious of her with her charges. After my father died, my mother's support needs increased. We didn't know it then, but it was the early stages of dementia. So I left Rush and moved in with her. It was an intense, often difficult time. Dementia is a cruel disease. We managed for a long time, but then one day she no longer knew who I was. Her care needs quickly became overwhelming, and eventually the doctors decreed that she had to be admitted to a nursing home. Rationally, I knew that it wasn't my fault, but I felt that I had failed as a carer. I also felt that I had failed as a filmmaker and that my opportunity had passed me by. On the other hand, I knew that I was very lucky to have somewhere nice to live, and in general I have been very fortunate in life. Then by chance I read an article about the crisis with unwanted and abandoned dogs in Ireland, and after some thought I contacted Sinead in Cara Rescue. And one day Sinead sent me a photo of a skinny, malnourished lurcher bitch in a cage. This dog had been dumped to fend for herself, and it had taken the pound a couple of days to catch her. She was milking as she had just given birth to a litter, but they couldn't find the pups. I worried about my capacity to look after a dog. Sinead suggested that I foster the dog as a compromise. I agreed to foster, and so I drove to Offaly to pick her up. When I put the dog in the van, she looked miserable. She didn't have a name, so I decided to call her Dicey.
Don't be shaking, Dicey, you'll be grand. You and me's got a grand out with high Dicey, right?
I brought Dicey home and she was clearly traumatised. At first I thought she was deaf because she just lay there ignoring everything. I had to bring her to be neutered, and this seemed to further stress her. For the first weeks, whenever I brought her for walks, her tail remained between her legs. She was a really beautiful dog, and gradually her sweet, gentle nature started to reveal itself.
Oh, you want to sit there now, yeah?
After a few weeks, I brought her out to my old stomping ground in Rush, and this trip felt like a turning point. It was a rebirth of sorts for both of us.
Good girl, Dice. To hook you in, Dice. I know you don't like it.
After that, she started to thrive, and strangely so did I. We adopted each other as best mates, and our situation became what is known as a foster fail. This was by far the best failure yet. We even met her tribe on a sighthound walk. A lurcher is not a breed, I learned. It is a cross between a sighthound like a greyhound, a whippet or a saluki, and a non-sighthound breed, a mongrel of sorts. A disproportionately large percentage of dogs in Irish rescues and pounds are lurchers. They have often been kept in poor conditions, bred relentlessly, and then simply discarded when their health or speed fail them. This sweet, delicate, loving creature gives me more pleasure than I could have imagined. Her trusting, affectionate nature lifts my spirits every day. She gets me out and she gets me exercising, and I've decided to try and dip my toe back into the world of filmmaking.